A black Uber driver named Marcus Reed pulls up to a lavish wedding, quietly doing his job. The car, a simple black Toyota Camry, looks out of place among the parade of gleaming luxury vehicles. The bride-to-be, a woman named Vanessa Holloway, sneers and humiliates him in front of her guests. She mocks his clothes, calling him just a driver, and orders him off the property like he is nothing. But what none of them know is that Marcus isn't just a driver. He's the billionaire co-founder and business partner of the groom himself. And by the time the ceremony ends, jaws will drop, careers will be ruined, and Vanessa's dream wedding will never be the same again. Before we find out what happens next, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. And if Vanessa's attitude already rubbed you the wrong way, make sure you hit that like button. The crisp autumn air was filled with the scent of money and roses. At the Holloway estate, a sprawling mansion of white stone and perfectly manicured lawns, the wedding of the year was about to begin. Cars with names like Rolls-Royce, Bentley, and Maybach glided up the long, winding driveway, depositing guests dressed in the finest fabrics money could buy. Men in tailored suits with watches worth more than a house laughed with women in glittering dresses that shimmered under the afternoon sun. This was a world of effortless wealth, a place where appearances were everything. Into this sea of luxury, a simple black Toyota Camry made its way. It was clean, well-maintained, but it was an ordinary car in a world that despised the ordinary. The contrast was so sharp it was almost comical. The valet, a young man in a crisp red vest, hesitated for a moment, his eyes darting from the Camry to the line of supercars behind it. He looked almost confused, as if a glitch had occurred in the matrix of the super-rich. Marcus Reed stepped out of the driver's seat. He was dressed in simple dark jeans, a clean but plain gray t-shirt, and a lightweight driver's jacket. He closed the door with a soft click and gave the valet a polite nod. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice calm and even. "Could you tell me where the service entrance is? I have a delivery." He didn't get an answer from the valet. Instead, a sharp, cutting voice sliced through the air. "What is this? Who let this Uber driver onto my property?" All heads turned. There, standing on the grand marble steps of the estate, was Vanessa Holloway. She was a vision in a white gown that must have cost a fortune, her blonde hair styled in a perfect updo, diamonds sparkling at her ears and throat. But the beauty of her appearance was completely shattered by the ugly twist of her lips. Her face was a mask of pure disgust as she stared at Marcus and his car. She marched down the steps, her expensive heels clicking angrily on the stone. The wedding planner, a nervous man named Harold Green, scurried behind her, wringing his hands. "I'll handle this, Miss Holloway," he stammered, but she waved him away with a flick of her wrist. The crowd of guests parted for her like the sea. Some of them looked uncomfortable, but many were smirking, eager to watch the drama unfold. This was entertainment for them, a little bit of real-world ugliness to spice up their perfect afternoon. Vanessa stopped a few feet from Marcus, looking him up and down as if he were a piece of trash that had washed up on her pristine beach. Her eyes lingered on his simple clothes, her nose wrinkled in disdain. "Are you lost?" she asked, her voice dripping with condescension. "This is a private event, a very exclusive event. I think you took a wrong turn somewhere. The soup kitchen is on the other side of town." A ripple of cruel laughter went through the crowd. Marcus remained perfectly still. He met her gaze without anger, his expression unreadable. "I'm here for the wedding," he said calmly. "I just need to know where the service entrance is." "The service entrance?" Vanessa scoffed, a disbelieving laugh escaping her lips. She turned to her guests, a performer playing to her audience. "Did you hear that? He thinks he belongs here. Look at you." She gestured at his entire being with a dismissive wave of her hand. "In those cheap clothes, in that pathetic little car, you are a nobody. You are just a driver. You don't belong in the same air as my guests." Harold, the planner, stepped forward again, eager to please his demanding client. "He's right, Miss Holloway. We have to maintain standards. Security," he called out, his voice thin and reedy. Two large men in black suits who had been standing by the entrance began to walk toward Marcus. Marcus didn't move. He simply looked at Vanessa, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. It wasn't anger, it was something closer to disappointment, a quiet, profound sadness. He could have ended this in a second. One sentence, one name, and her entire world would crumble. But that wasn't the plan. The plan was to see, to understand, and now he was seeing everything. "Get him out of here," Vanessa ordered, her voice like ice, "and get that junk heap he calls a car off my driveway before it leaks oil on the pavement. I don't want him on this property. I don't even want him on this street." The security guards reached Marcus, their faces stern and impassive. They were just doing their job. Marcus didn't resist. He simply gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. He turned to Vanessa one last time. "I'm sorry to have troubled you," he said, his voice soft but clear. The words were an apology, but the tone held a different weight. It was the kind of apology a doctor gives before delivering bad news. He then turned and walked away, his posture straight, his steps unhurried. The guards flanked him for a few feet before stopping, watching him go. The crowd of guests began to whisper and snicker. They had their little show, and now the main event could continue. Vanessa watched him go, a triumphant smirk on her face. She flipped her perfectly styled hair over her shoulder and turned back to her adoring audience. "You see," she announced loudly, "that's how you handle the riffraff. This is a billionaire wedding, not a bus stop." Her friends and bridesmaids laughed and applauded, showering her with praise for her decisiveness, for her commitment to keeping things classy. Among the sea of smiling faces and flashing phones, one person was not smiling. A young woman in a simple black catering uniform, Lila Torres, stood near a service tent, holding a tray of empty champagne glasses. Her face was pale with shock. She had seen the whole thing, the raw, unfiltered cruelty of it. And her phone, held discreetly at her side, had recorded every single word. Outside the grand gates of the Holloway estate, Marcus Reed leaned against the warm metal of his Toyota Camry. He took a slow, deep breath, letting the clean autumn air fill his lungs, and then exhaled, releasing the tension that had gathered in his chest. He could feel the adrenaline still humming in his veins, a low-level thrum of energy. It would have been so easy to let his anger take over, so easy to wipe that smug, entitled look off Vanessa's face with a few simple words. He could have destroyed her right there, in front of all her high society friends. He could have said, "I'm Marcus Reed. I own half of your fiancé's company. This wedding you're so proud of, I'm paying for a good chunk of it." The thought brought a grim, fleeting smile to his lips. The chaos, the shock, the delicious irony of it all. It was tempting, but Marcus was a man who played the long game. Anger was a wildfire, powerful and destructive, but it burned out quickly. Patience, on the other hand, was a river. It was quiet, steady, and over time, it could carve through mountains. Today was not about a quick, satisfying burst of revenge. It was about something much more important. He pulled out his phone, his fingers moving quickly across the screen. He sent a single, concise text message to a secure number. "Arrived. Everything's in motion." The reply came back almost instantly. "Understood. Awaiting your signal." He slipped the phone back into his pocket. The gears were turning. The plan was proceeding. Inside, back within the bubble of wealth and privilege, Vanessa was holding court. She was retelling the story of her encounter with the Uber driver, each telling more dramatic and self-aggrandizing than the last. She stood with a circle of her bridesmaids, their pastel dresses a soft contrast to her brilliant white gown. "I mean, the nerve of some people," she said, taking a delicate sip of champagne. "He just pulled up, as if he had an invitation. I had to put him in his place. You have to be firm with people like that, or they'll think they can walk all over you." Harold, the wedding planner, hovered nearby, nodding enthusiastically. You were magnificent, Miss Holloway. Absolutely magnificent. You handled it with such grace and authority. We can't have just anyone wandering onto the grounds. It lowers the tone. Exactly, Harold, Vanessa said, beaming at his flattery. This is Ethan Carter's wedding. Everything has to be perfect. No distractions. No undesirables. One of her bridesmaids giggled. You totally owned him, V. He probably cried all the way back to his sad little apartment. Vanessa laughed, a sound that was bright and clear but held no real warmth. He'll think twice before crashing a high society event again, I'm sure. She lowered her voice slightly, leaning in conspiratorially. It's all about protecting the brand, you know? The Carter Reed brand. We can't have it associated with that. Meanwhile, shaken by what she had witnessed, Lila Torres slipped away from the bustling service area. She needed a moment of quiet, a chance to process the ugliness she had just seen. She found a small, discreet side gate and stepped out onto the quiet street, her heart still pounding in her chest. She saw Marcus standing by his car, a figure of profound stillness in the midst of the day's frantic energy. Hesitantly, she walked over to him. In her hand, she clutched a cold bottle of water she had grabbed on her way out. "Excuse me," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Marcus turned, his expression softening when he saw her. He recognized her from the catering staff. "I saw what happened," Lila said, her eyes filled with genuine sympathy. "With the bride. I'm so sorry about her. That was horrible." She held out the bottle of water. "I thought you might want this." A warm, genuine smile touched Marcus's lips for the first time that day. It transformed his face, chasing away the shadows of a moment before. "Thank you," he said, accepting the water. "That's very kind of you." "She had no right to talk to you like that," Lila continued, feeling a surge of courage. "No matter who you are, it was just mean." Marcus took a sip of the water, his gaze thoughtful. "Don't worry about it," he said, his voice gentle. "People show you who they are. You just have to be patient enough to watch." He looked at her, truly looked at her, and saw the integrity in her eyes. "Thank you again. I appreciate this more than you know." Lila nodded, feeling a strange sense of relief. She turned to go back inside, her conscience a little lighter. As she walked away, Marcus's words echoed in her mind. People show you who they are. And Vanessa Holloway had just shown everyone exactly who she was. In a luxurious suite on the second floor of the estate, a world away from the drama on the driveway, Ethan Carter was pacing. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, his dark hair slightly disheveled from running his hands through it. He was a man who commanded boardrooms and moved markets, a titan of the tech industry. But right now he was just a groom, and he was nervous. More than nervous, he was worried. He checked his watch for the 10th time in as many minutes. "Where is he?" he muttered to himself. He pulled out his phone and scrolled to a contact named Marcus. He hovered his thumb over the call button, then sighed, and put the phone away. Marcus was always on time, always reliable. For him to be late on a day like this, it wasn't like him. Ethan walked to the window and looked down at the stream of guests arriving below. He was marrying the woman he thought he loved. He was surrounded by friends and family. He should have been happy. But a crucial piece was missing. His best friend, his co-founder, the brother he'd chosen, the man who had been with him from the very beginning, long before the billions and the fame. He had no idea that the man he was desperately waiting for had just been thrown out by his bride. The story of Marcus Reed wasn't one of inherited wealth or lucky breaks. It was a story forged in late nights, fueled by cheap coffee, and built on a foundation of pure, unadulterated genius. He and Ethan Carter had met at Harvard, two young men with big ideas and empty pockets. Ethan was the visionary, the charismatic frontman who could sell a dream to anyone. But Marcus was the architect of that dream. He was the brains, the quiet, relentless force who could turn impossible ideas into functional, elegant code. After graduating, they turned down lucrative offers from established tech giants to chase their own vision. They started their company, Carter Reed Dynamics, in a cramped garage, a cliché that happened to be true. They lived on instant noodles and the unshakable belief that they were building something that would change the world. While Ethan was out meeting with investors, giving presentations, and building their public profile, Marcus was in the background working 18-hour days, writing the complex algorithms that would become the backbone of their multi-billion-dollar empire. Carter Reed Dynamics developed a revolutionary AI-driven logistics platform that optimized supply chains for global corporations. It was a game changer, and it made them both billionaires before they turned 30. Their company was now worth an estimated $40 billion. Ethan became the celebrated public face of their success, a media darling featured on the covers of magazines. Marcus, by choice, remained in the shadows. He had no interest in the fame, the galas, the superficial world of the super-rich. He turned down board seats at other companies, refused interviews, and valued his privacy above all else. This quiet humility was not an act. It was the core of who he was. Despite his immense wealth, Marcus lived a life that was startlingly simple. He still lived in a modest, comfortable house in a quiet neighborhood, not a sprawling mansion. He drove his reliable Toyota Camry because it was a good car, not because it was a status symbol. He wore jeans and t-shirts because they were comfortable. He found joy not in acquiring things, but in creating them. His passion was still the work, the elegant puzzle of code, the challenge of building something new. He believed that a person's worth was defined by their character, their integrity, and how they treated others, especially those who could do nothing for them. It was a belief system that was about to be put to the ultimate test. His presence at the wedding today wasn't a coincidence, nor was his choice of attire and transportation. When Ethan had announced his engagement to Vanessa, he had insisted that Marcus be his best man. But Marcus, ever private, had politely declined the official title, asking instead to play a more low-key role. Ethan, however, was adamant that Marcus be recognized. "You're not just my best friend, Marcus," Ethan had argued a few weeks ago in their shared office, a sleek space of glass and steel overlooking the city. "You're my partner. You built this with me. This wedding isn't just about me and Vanessa. It's a celebration of everything we've achieved. I want you up there with me." They had eventually compromised. Marcus would not be the best man in the traditional sense, but he would be a co-host of the reception. Ethan planned to introduce him to everyone after the ceremony to finally and publicly give his partner the credit he so richly deserved. It was meant to be a surprise, a grand reveal for the media and the guests. Marcus had agreed, but with a condition of his own. "Let me arrive quietly," he had told Ethan. "No fanfare. I want to come in under the radar." Ethan, thinking it was just Marcus being his usual humble self, had readily agreed. But Marcus had a deeper motive. Over the past year, he had harbored a quiet, growing concern about Vanessa. He had met her several times at dinners and events. She was always charming, beautiful, and poised. But Marcus had a finely tuned instinct for people, an ability to see past the polished exterior. He saw the way her eyes lit up when people talked about money or status. He noticed how she treated waiters and service staff with a polite but dismissive coolness. There was a hardness to her, a transactional quality that made him uneasy. He suspected she was more in love with the idea of being Mrs. Ethan Carter, Billionaire's wife, than she was with Ethan the man. He needed to know for sure, not for his own sake, but for Ethan's. His friend was head over heels in love, blinded by a whirlwind romance. He couldn't see what Marcus saw. So Marcus had devised a simple, elegant test. He would arrive at the wedding not as Marcus Reed, the billionaire co-founder, but as an anonymous driver in an ordinary car. It was a litmus test of character. How would she treat someone she perceived as being beneath her? How would she react to a small, insignificant disruption to her perfect, status-obsessed world? Today, she had given him the answer, and it was worse than he could have ever imagined. As he stood outside the gates, the full weight of her cruelty settled upon him. This wasn't just a simple case of a bride being rude on her wedding day. This was a revelation of a deep and profound character flaw, a flaw that could pose a very real threat. This wasn't just personal anymore. The initial sting of her insults, the mocking of his clothes, the disgust in her voice, was already fading, replaced by a cold, clear sense of purpose. This was about protecting his friend. Ethan was a good man with a kind and generous heart. He deserved a partner who loved him for who he was, not for what he had. Vanessa's behavior proved she was not that person. She hadn't just insulted a driver. She had revealed a fundamental disrespect for the very values upon which they had built their lives and their company. Carter-Reed Dynamics was more than just a business to Marcus and Ethan. It was their legacy. They had built it on principles of meritocracy, respect, and integrity. They prided themselves on creating a company culture where everyone, from the janitors to the senior executives, was treated with dignity. They had launched charitable foundations, funded scholarships for underprivileged students, and implemented fair wage policies long before it was fashionable. The company's success was rooted in these values, and Vanessa Holloway was the antithesis of all of it. Marcus thought about the future. If she married Ethan, she would become a part of their world, a part of their company in a very real sense. She would have influence. Her values, or lack thereof, would seep into the fabric of their lives. He imagined her sitting on charity boards, her presence a mockery of their mission. He imagined her influencing Ethan's business decisions, pushing him toward choices based on greed and status rather than principle. He imagined the poison of her entitlement spreading, tainting everything they had worked so hard to build. The memory of their early days flashed in his mind. The two of them in that dusty garage, sharing a single pizza because it was all they could afford, their minds buzzing with excitement and possibility. They had made a promise to each other back then, that no matter how successful they became, they would never forget where they came from. They would never become the kind of people who looked down on others. Vanessa had looked down on him. She had done it with such ease, such casual cruelty. To her, he was invisible, a nobody. She had no idea that the nobody she had just kicked out held the power to unravel her entire world. The irony was almost overwhelming. She was marrying a billionaire, but she had just shown a complete and utter inability to recognize true value. She was blinded by the superficial trappings of wealth, the fancy cars, the designer clothes, the grand estates. She couldn't see the worth of the person standing right in front of her. This was no longer just about protecting his friend from a bad marriage. It was about protecting their empire, their legacy, their very soul. He had to act. He had to stop this, not with an outburst of anger, but with a calm, strategic, and decisive move. The test was over. The results were in. And now, judgment was coming. He looked back at the grand estate, at the towering white columns and the laughing guests. It all looked so perfect, so unbreakable. But Marcus knew better. He knew that even the most beautiful facade could be brought down by a rotten foundation. And he was about to expose the rot at the heart of this perfect day. Back inside the bustling service tent, Lila Torres couldn't shake the image of the encounter from her mind. Her hands trembled slightly as she stacked clean plates, the sound of Vanessa's sharp, condescending voice echoing in her ears. "Get this driver out of my wedding." "A nobody." The words were like shards of glass. She pulled out her phone, her thumb hovering over the video she had recorded. Her finger swiped, and she replayed the scene. The video was clear, the audio crisp. There was Vanessa, radiant and cruel, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at the calm, unassuming man. There were the guests, their faces a mixture of amusement and feigned shock. And there was the man, Marcus, absorbing the insults, with a quiet dignity that was more powerful than any angry retort could have been. Lila's heart ached for him. She knew what it was like to be treated as invisible. As a member of the catering staff, she was often overlooked, spoken over, or dismissed entirely. She was part of the machinery that made lavish events like this possible, but she was not meant to be seen or heard. She was used to it, but seeing it happen to someone else with such public, vicious glee felt different. It felt wrong, deeply wrong. A wave of fear washed over her. What if someone found out she had this video? She could be fired on the spot. Harold Green, the wedding planner, was a stickler for staff discretion. An incident like this could get her blacklisted from every high-end catering company in the city. Her job was her lifeline. She was working 2 jobs to help support her mother and younger sister. She couldn't afford to lose it. She should just delete the video. Forget it ever happened. It wasn't her fight. She was just a catering assistant. What could she possibly do? But then she thought of the man's face, the way he had looked at Vanessa, not with hate, but with a kind of pity. The way he had thanked Lila for the bottle of water, his smile so genuine and warm. He didn't deserve to be humiliated like that. No one did. People like her shouldn't get away with this, she murmured to herself, her voice a fierce whisper. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach, but another feeling was rising to meet it. A hot, powerful surge of indignation. It was the feeling of someone who had been pushed too far, who had seen one too many injustices go unanswered. She thought about her options. Who could she send it to? The media? A gossip blog? That felt messy, and it could backfire on her. Maybe she could send it to the groom, Ethan Carter, but how? She didn't know him. She'd probably be stopped by security before she could get anywhere near him. Her eyes scanned the bustling grounds, and she saw Harold, the planner, fawning over Vanessa's mother. He was part of the problem. He had enabled Vanessa, encouraged her. He was no help. Then an idea began to form. It was a long shot, a crazy idea, but it was the only one she had. The company, Carter Reed Dynamics. She didn't know who worked there, but a company that big had to have a public relations department or an HR department, a general contact email. Maybe, just maybe, if she sent the video there, someone would see it. Someone who cared about the company's image. Someone who would be horrified to see the future wife of their CEO behaving this way. It was a risk, a huge risk. But the alternative, doing nothing, letting Vanessa's cruelty stand, felt even worse. She took a deep breath, her decision made. She would wait for the right moment, a quiet moment when no one was watching, and she would send the video. She would attach a simple, anonymous note. This happened today at Ethan Carter's wedding. This is the woman he's about to marry. It was a small act of defiance, a single stone thrown against a giant wall. But sometimes a single stone is all it takes to start an avalanche. Lila slipped her phone back into her apron pocket, her resolve hardening. She was just a catering assistant, but today she was going to be a witness. Inside the main reception hall, the atmosphere was thick with champagne and self-congratulation. Vanessa Holloway was at the center of it all, a radiant sun around which all the other planets orbited. She glided through the room, her laughter tinkling, accepting compliments on her dress, the flowers, the sheer perfection of it all. To the outside world, she was the perfect bride, beautiful, charming, and ecstatically happy. But in the quiet corners of the room and conversations whispered behind champagne flutes, her true nature continued to reveal itself. She was gathered with her closest bridesmaids near the towering 10-tiered wedding cake, basking in their adoration. "Honestly, V, I still can't believe that driver," one of them said, shaking her head in mock disbelief. "The absolute audacity." Vanessa waved her hand dismissively, a small, smug smile playing on her lips. "Oh, please, you have to keep the riffraff out. It's like weeding a garden. If you let one in, they all think they're welcome." She took a delicate bite of a canapé. He was probably hoping to get a picture to sell to the tabloids, a real beggar. Harold, the planner, who had just rushed over to ensure her champagne glass was full, chuckled along nervously. A brilliant metaphor, Miss Holloway. A garden indeed. And this is the most beautiful garden in the world. Vanessa gave him a tight, patronizing smile. See, Harold gets it. She then leaned in closer to her friends, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Speaking of weeding the garden, I have bigger plans than just getting rid of stray drivers. Her bridesmaids leaned in, their eyes wide with curiosity. Ethan is a genius, obviously, Vanessa continued. But he's too soft, too sentimental, especially about his business partner, this Marcus guy. She rolled her eyes dramatically. The man is practically a ghost. Never comes to any events, doesn't sit on any important boards. Ethan insists on keeping him as a 50% partner out of some misplaced sense of loyalty. It's ridiculous. One bridesmaid gasped. 50%? But what does he even do? Exactly, Vanessa exclaimed, her voice sharp. He hides behind a computer screen while Ethan does all the real work, the schmoozing, the networking, the things that actually matter. It's a charity case, that's what it is. Once we're married and I have a more official role in things, I'm going to convince Ethan to buy him out. It's time to trim the fat. Her words hung in the air, chilling in their casual brutality. She wasn't just talking about a business transaction. She was talking about erasing a person's legacy, a person she had never properly met, simply because he didn't fit her image of what power and success should look like. I want it to be our company, she said, her eyes gleaming with ambition. The Carter Holloway Group. It has a much better ring to it, don't you think? Not some charity project. Her friends murmured their agreement, impressed by her ruthlessness. They saw it as strength, as a sign that she was a true power player. They didn't see the black hole of insecurity and greed that was driving her. They didn't see the profound arrogance of a woman who was about to marry into an empire while plotting to discard the man who had laid its very foundation. Vanessa smiled, satisfied. Her victory seemed complete. She had gotten rid of the unsightly driver. She had the adoration of her guests. She had a billionaire husband waiting for her at the altar. And soon, she would have control of a $40 billion company. Her plan was perfect. Her world was perfect. She was blissfully, dangerously unaware that her every arrogant word, her every cruel ambition, was setting the stage for a downfall of spectacular proportions. She thought she was weeding the garden, but in reality she was the weed, and she was about to be pulled out by the roots. While Vanessa was inside plotting her corporate takeover, Marcus Reed was outside making a single decisive move. He had walked a short distance down the quiet, tree-lined street, far enough away from the estate to ensure complete privacy. The sounds of the wedding, the faint strains of a string quartet, the murmur of the crowd, were a distant hum. Here it was just him, his phone, and the monumental decision he was about to make. He didn't call Ethan. This was a situation that required precision, not emotion. Involving Ethan now would only complicate things. His friend was already a bundle of nerves, and telling him that his bride-to-be had just humiliated his business partner would detonate a bomb in the middle of his wedding day. There would be a confrontation, a messy, emotional scene. Vanessa would cry, she would apologize, she would manipulate. Ethan, with his good heart, might even be tempted to forgive her. Marcus couldn't allow that to happen. This needed to be handled cleanly, surgically, without the chaos of a personal dispute. So he made a different call. He scrolled through his contacts to a secure group labeled CRD Board. He pressed the call button, and it initiated a conference call to the 6 most powerful people in his company, the members of the Carter Reed Dynamics Board of Directors. They were titans of industry, sharp, no-nonsense individuals who respected only 2 things: results and integrity. The call connected almost instantly. A crisp, professional voice came on the line first. "Mr. Reed, this is unexpected. Is everything all right?" "Everything is fine, David," Marcus replied, his voice calm and steady. "But I need to convene an emergency meeting." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. An emergency board meeting was a rare and serious event. It meant something significant had happened. "When?" another board member asked, her voice tinged with concern. "Today," Marcus said. "Immediately after the wedding ceremony at the Holloway estate. I've had a private boardroom prepared on site. I need every single one of you there. No exceptions. No delays." The unspoken question hung in the air. Why? But no one asked it. They knew Marcus Reed. He was not a man given to drama or exaggeration. If he was calling an emergency meeting, there was a very good reason. His quiet, understated nature gave his words an incredible weight. When he spoke, people listened. "We'll be there," David said, his voice firm. "What's the agenda?" "The agenda," Marcus said, his eyes looking back toward the opulent estate, "is the long-term security and ethical stability of this company. A situation has arisen that poses a direct threat to the core values of Carter Reed Dynamics. It requires our immediate and unanimous attention." He paused for a moment, letting the gravity of his words sink in. "It's time," he said, a note of finality in his tone. "I want everyone present." He ended the call. It was done. The trap was set. The pieces were moving into position on the chessboard. Vanessa thought she was the queen, powerful and untouchable. She had no idea she was just a pawn in a much larger game, a game she had already lost the moment she opened her mouth. Marcus felt a profound sense of clarity. There was no anger left, only a cold, hard resolve. He had given Vanessa a chance to show her character, and she had failed in the most spectacular way possible. Now she would face the consequences, not the hot-tempered consequences of a personal argument, but the cold, dispassionate consequences of a corporate decision. He was about to treat her exactly as she had treated him, as a problem to be dealt with, a liability to be removed. He walked back toward his car, no longer a simple driver, but a silent executioner on the verge of passing sentence. The sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the perfectly manicured lawns of the Holloway estate. The string quartet inside transitioned from gentle background music to the grand processional melody that signaled the beginning of the ceremony. Guests were ushered from the gardens and patios into the grand hall, their chatter softening to expectant whispers. The air was thick with anticipation. Vanessa Holloway, standing just outside the hall with her father, took a final deep breath. She was glowing, a picture of bridal perfection. Her earlier anger had completely dissipated, replaced by a radiant glow of triumph. She felt powerful, adored, and completely in control. Her future was a glittering path laid out before her. As the massive oak doors to the hall swung open, revealing the candlelit aisle and the sea of faces turned in her direction, Ethan Carter stood at the altar, his face lit with a nervous but genuine smile. He scanned the crowd one last time, a flicker of disappointment in his eyes. Still no sign of Marcus. He pushed the worry aside. Marcus would never let him down. He must have gotten held up. He would be here. He had to be. At that exact moment, Marcus Reed entered the hall, but not through the main doors. He slipped in silently through a small, private side entrance reserved for staff and family, an entrance he knew about from the blueprints he had reviewed weeks ago. He was no longer the man in the driver's jacket. He had changed in a private room he had prearranged. He was now wearing a tailored charcoal suit that fit him perfectly. The simple, elegant garment transformed him. It didn't make him a different person, but it revealed the person who had been there all along, a man of quiet power and immense presence. He took a seat in the third row in a chair that had been reserved for him. It was a seat of honor among the VIP guests and senior executives of his company. Only one person in the room seemed to notice his arrival. Lila Torres, standing discreetly against the back wall with the other catering staff, saw him enter. Her eyes widened for a second in surprise. She saw the new suit, the change in his demeanor, and then a slow, knowing smile spread across her face. She didn't understand what was happening, not fully, but she knew that the story was not over. Something was about to happen. As Vanessa began her walk down the aisle on her father's arm, her eyes scanned the adoring crowd. Then her gaze fell upon Marcus. She froze for a microsecond, her perfect smile faltering. A look of confusion, then annoyance crossed her face. The driver. What was he doing in here? And in a suit? Who had let him in? She shot a furious glare at Harold, who was standing near the front, fussing with a floral arrangement. She hissed at him as she passed, her voice a venomous whisper lost in the soaring music. Who let the driver in? Harold followed her gaze, his eyes widening in confusion. He had no idea. He just shrugged helplessly, his face paling with the fear of her impending wrath. Vanessa's mind raced. Had he sneaked in? Was he trying to cause a scene? She made a mental note to have security throw him out, personally this time, the second the ceremony was over. She refocused on Ethan, her smile returning, a little tighter this time. The presence of that insignificant man was a tiny crack in her perfect day, and she would not tolerate it. The ceremony proceeded flawlessly. The vows were exchanged. The rings were placed on fingers. Vanessa's voice was clear and steady, as she promised to love, honor, and cherish Ethan. She looked into his eyes, projecting an image of pure, unadulterated love. Ethan, still blissfully unaware of the storm that was gathering, looked back at her with genuine affection. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the officiant declared. You may kiss the bride. They kissed. The crowd erupted in applause. It was the perfect moment, the climax of a fairy tale. Vanessa's dream was now a reality. She was Mrs. Ethan Carter. But as they turned to walk back down the aisle, their triumphant march was cut short. Two stern-faced security guards, the same ones who had escorted Marcus off the property earlier, approached them. They didn't look at Ethan. They looked directly at Vanessa. Another guard approached Harold, who was still trying to look busy with the flowers. One of the guards spoke, his voice low but firm, impossible to ignore. Miss Holloway, Mr. Green, the board is requesting your presence now. Vanessa's smile vanished. The board? What are you talking about? We're about to have our reception. It's not a request, the guard said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Ethan looked completely bewildered. What's going on? What board? But before anyone could explain, the guards were flanking Vanessa and Harold, gently but firmly guiding them toward a side door, away from the confused and whispering guests. The fairy tale had come to an abrupt, screeching halt. The dream was about to turn into a nightmare. The mahogany-lined boardroom was silent and cold. It felt like a courtroom. The air was heavy with unspoken tension. Vanessa and Harold were led into the room, their confusion rapidly turning to fear. Seated around the massive polished table were 6 men and women, their faces grim and unreadable. These were the board members of Carter Reed Dynamics, some of the most powerful and influential figures in the tech world. Ethan was there too, standing near the head of the table. He had been escorted to the room just moments before them, and his face was a storm of conflicting emotions. He looked confused, angry, and deeply hurt. His eyes, when they met Vanessa's, were not the eyes of a loving new husband. They were the eyes of a stranger. And then Vanessa saw him. Standing near the window, his back to the fading afternoon light, was Marcus Reed. He was no longer the humbled driver. He was a man in complete command, his posture radiating a quiet, unshakable confidence. He held a tablet in his hand, and on its screen was a video, paused on a horribly familiar image. Her own face, twisted in a sneer of contempt. Vanessa's blood ran cold. The color drained from her face. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. A chilling stillness fell over her. She finally understood. This was not a random coincidence. This was a setup. She had walked right into a trap. Harold Green looked like he was about to faint. He stared at Marcus, his mind struggling to connect the man in the expensive suit with the nobody he had helped humiliate just an hour ago. The pieces were clicking into place with a horrifying, sickening finality. Outside the boardroom, the wedding guests were in a state of chaos. The music had stopped. Waiters stood frozen with trays of food. Whispers turned into loud, frantic questions. What was happening? Why had the bride and groom been taken away? The perfect wedding had fractured, and the guests, like vultures, circled the drama, hungry for information. Inside the room, the silence was finally broken. It was Ethan who spoke, his voice shaking with a fury that Vanessa had never heard before. He gestured toward the tablet in Marcus's hand. "They just showed me this, Vanessa. They showed me what you did." Lila Torres's video had already been sent. One of the board members, a woman known for her sharp instincts and deep loyalty to the company's founders, had received the anonymous email just as the ceremony began. She had immediately understood the gravity of the situation and had discreetly shown it to the others. By the time Ethan had been brought into the room, the verdict had already been decided. They had simply been waiting for him. "Ethan, I can explain," Vanessa stammered, her voice a desperate, trembling whisper. "It was a misunderstanding. That man, he was trespassing." Her words trailed off as Marcus took a step forward. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace, his eyes locked on hers. He wasn't angry. He was something far more terrifying. He was disappointed. "Allow me to reintroduce myself," Marcus said, his voice quiet, but carrying the weight of absolute authority. It echoed in the silent room. "My name is Marcus Reed." He paused, letting the name hang in the air. Harold Green gasped audibly, his hand flying to his mouth. He recognized the name, Reed, as in Carter Reed Dynamics, the other half, the silent partner, the ghost. Vanessa's mind refused to process it. It couldn't be. This was a joke, a cruel, elaborate prank. Marcus continued, his voice as sharp and precise as a surgeon's scalpel. "I am the co-founder, the chief technology architect, and the 50% owner of Carter Reed Dynamics." He held up the tablet so the board could see the video one more time. "And I am the man you called a nobody and ordered off the property." The blood drained completely from Vanessa's face. Her knees felt weak, as if the bones had turned to water. She reached out a hand to steady herself on the back of a chair. The entire world seemed to tilt on its axis. The driver, the beggar. The man she had mocked and humiliated was the source of the very power she so desperately craved. It was a revelation so profound, so devastating, that it felt like a physical blow. Ethan turned to her, his face a mask of betrayal. "You humiliated him," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "You humiliated the man who built this entire world with me. The man who is my brother in every way that matters. Do you have any idea what he's done for me? For this company?" Vanessa shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "I didn't know," she pleaded, her voice breaking. "How could I have known? If you had just told me who he was." "That's the entire point, Vanessa," Marcus cut in, his voice still calm, but now with an edge of steel. "It shouldn't matter who I am. It shouldn't matter what I wear or what I drive. You were presented with a human being, and you chose to treat him with contempt because you perceived him as being beneath you." He began to pace slowly in front of the long table, addressing not just Vanessa, but the entire room. "I didn't come here as a driver to trick you. I came here to see the truth. I had to know if the woman my best friend was marrying valued him for his heart or for his bank account. I had to know if she shared the values of respect and dignity that this company was built on." He stopped and looked directly at her, his gaze piercing. "And you showed me. You showed all of us exactly who you are." The tears were streaming down Vanessa's face now. This wasn't a performance. This was the raw, genuine terror of someone watching their entire life's ambition burn to the ground in a matter of seconds. "I'm sorry," she sobbed, turning to Ethan. "Please, Ethan, it was a mistake. I was stressed. It's the wedding. I wasn't thinking." "A mistake," said David, the lead board member, his voice a low growl. "Miss Holloway, what we saw on that video was not a mistake. It was a clear and concise demonstration of your character. It shows a staggering lack of judgment and a complete absence of basic human decency." Another board member, a sharp woman named Eleanor Vance, chimed in. "Carter Reed Dynamics has a brand to protect, a reputation built on integrity. We can't have that brand associated with someone who embodies the worst kind of arrogance and elitism. It's a liability we simply cannot afford." Ethan looked from the stony faces of his board to the weeping face of the woman he had married less than an hour ago. The fog of love was clearing, replaced by a horrible, painful clarity. He saw her now for what she was. He saw the calculation in her eyes, even through the tears. He remembered her comments about his charity case partner, comments that had seemed odd at the time but now made a sickening kind of sense. Marcus hadn't just saved the company. He had saved him. He looked at Vanessa, and all the love he thought he felt was gone, replaced by a deep, hollow ache of betrayal. "We can't let someone like this near the company," Eleanor had said. Ethan took a deep breath, his decision made. "Or near me," he added, his voice regaining its strength, its familiar tone of command. The words hit Vanessa harder than a slap. It was over. She knew it. It was all over. The fallout was not a slow burn. It was an explosion. The consequences came down on Vanessa and her enablers with swift and brutal efficiency. There was no negotiation, no second chance. The board, with Ethan's shaken but firm agreement, acted with the kind of ruthless precision that had made their company a global powerhouse. Before the first guest had even dared to leave the chaotic reception hall, Ethan's lawyers were on the phone. "Annul the marriage," Ethan had instructed them, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. "On grounds of fraud. She didn't marry me. She married my bank account. The prenup is clear about fraudulent inducement." The wedding, which had cost millions, was officially over before the reception had even begun. The ink on the marriage license was barely dry, and it was already being rendered meaningless. Simultaneously, the company's financial officers were instructed to act. Vanessa had been given a supplementary credit card and access to a joint account as a wedding gift. Those privileges were revoked instantly. A digital guillotine severed her access to the Carter fortune. Her accounts were frozen, pending a legal review of the prenuptial agreement she had signed so eagerly just weeks before. The clause about behavior that brings disrepute upon the Carter Reed name was about to be enforced with a vengeance. For Harold Green, the sycophantic wedding planner, the judgment was just as swift. One of the board members, David, turned to him, his expression one of pure disgust. "Mr. Green," he said, his voice dangerously low, "your services are no longer required. You will be paid for your work up to this moment, but your contract is terminated, effective immediately. Your willingness to enable and encourage this kind of behavior is a disgrace to your profession. You're fired." Harold's face went slack with shock. He opened his mouth to protest, to beg, but a look from the security guard standing by the door silenced him. His career, built on catering to the whims of the wealthy and powerful, was over. News of this disaster would spread through their elite circles like wildfire. No one would hire the planner who presided over the most catastrophic high society wedding of the decade. The news began to leak from the boardroom. The guests who had laughed and snickered at Marcus earlier now stood in stunned silence, their jaws agape. The story passed through the crowd in hushed, incredulous whispers. The driver was the co-founder. The bride was being thrown out. It was a scandal of epic proportions, more dramatic than any soap opera. The smirks were gone, replaced by pale faces and wide eyes. They looked over at Marcus, who was now standing beside Ethan, a quiet pillar of support. They looked at him with a new, terrified respect. They were all guilty of the same sin as Vanessa, judging a man by his cover. And they were all suddenly very aware of how close they had come to making the same fatal mistake. Vanessa's parents, who had been preening with pride just an hour earlier, were now speechless, their faces masks of horror and humiliation. Their daughter's golden ticket had just been torn to pieces in front of the entire world. Amid the chaos, there was one person whose fortunes were about to change for the better. Marcus turned to one of his assistants. "Find the catering assistant who recorded that video," he said. "Her name is Lila Torres. Bring her here." A few minutes later, a terrified Lila was escorted into the boardroom. She thought she was about to be fired, or worse. But when she entered, Marcus smiled at her, that same warm, genuine smile from before. He introduced her to the board and to Ethan. "This is Lila," he said. "She was the only person today who saw an injustice and had the courage to do something about it. She didn't do it for a reward. She did it because it was the right thing to do." He turned to her. "Lila, this company is built on integrity. It's our most valuable asset, and you have it in abundance." Ethan stepped forward. "We're creating a new position in my executive office," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "Executive assistant for special projects. It comes with a significant raise and full benefits. The job is yours if you want it." Lila was speechless. Tears filled her eyes, but these were tears of shock and overwhelming gratitude. She could only nod, her life having just been transformed by a single brave act, the final act of the tragedy played out on the grand marble steps where it had all begun. Vanessa was escorted out of the estate, no longer the radiant bride, but a broken, weeping woman. Her perfect dress was now just a costume for a part she no longer played. Her father and mother followed behind, their faces etched with shame. The dream was over. She saw Marcus standing near the door, watching her go. She made one last desperate plea. "Please," she cried, her voice raw with desperation. "It was just a mistake, one stupid mistake." Marcus looked at her, his expression not of anger or triumph, but of a quiet, profound finality. He had seen her true self, and it was a sight he would not soon forget. He shook his head slowly. "No, Vanessa," he said, his voice carrying clearly in the now silent air. "It wasn't a mistake." He paused, letting the weight of his final words settle upon her. "It was a revelation." The message of that day echoed far beyond the gates of the Holloway estate. It became a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms and at country clubs, a stark reminder that true power is not about the clothes you wear, the car you drive, or the name you carry. It's about character. It's about how you treat people, especially when you think no one is watching. Vanessa had believed that status was a shield, that her position as the bride of a billionaire made her untouchable. She had learned, in the most public and humiliating way possible, that status means nothing without a foundation of character. And hers was rotten to the core. In the quiet aftermath, with the bewildered guests finally dispersing, and a team of cleaners beginning the surreal task of dismantling a wedding that never was, Ethan and Marcus stood alone in the empty grand hall. The silence was a stark contrast to the joyful celebration that should have been. Ethan slumped into a chair, running his hands over his face. He looked exhausted, as if he had aged 10 years in a single afternoon. "I can't believe I didn't see it," he said, his voice heavy with self-reproach. "I was so blind. I wanted to believe she was the one." Marcus sat down across from him, his expression one of quiet empathy. "You're not blind, Ethan. You're a good person. You see the good in people because that's what you look for. That's your strength, not a weakness." "She was going to try and push you out," Ethan said, his voice barely a whisper. She told her friend she wanted to buy out your stake in the company. Marcus nodded slowly. I heard, but she wouldn't have succeeded. Our partnership is stronger than that. He leaned forward, his gaze direct and unwavering. I didn't do this to hurt you. I did it to protect you. To protect us. Everything we've built. A wave of profound gratitude washed over Ethan. He looked at his friend, his partner, the man who had just saved him from a lifetime of misery and a marriage built on a foundation of lies. He had been looking for Marcus all day, worried he wouldn't show up. But Marcus had been there all along, in a way that mattered more than just standing at the altar. He had been watching over him, protecting him, just as he always had. Thank you, Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion, for everything. You saved me from the biggest mistake of my life. Marcus placed a hand on his friend's shoulder. A rare, small smile touched his lips. That's what brothers do, he replied simply. The shattered pieces of the day were slowly swept away, but the lesson learned remained, powerful and indelible. For Vanessa, it was a harsh and public reckoning. She had lost everything she had schemed for, becoming a symbol of entitled arrogance. For Ethan, it was a painful but necessary awakening, a reminder to trust his instincts and to value character above all else. And for Marcus, it was a reaffirmation of his core beliefs, that true worth is quiet, that dignity is non-negotiable, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is to simply watch and wait for people to show you who they really are. The wedding was a disaster, but from its ashes, a new and stronger foundation of friendship, loyalty, and integrity had been forged. In the weeks that followed the disastrous wedding, the story of what happened at the Holloway estate became a legend in business circles. It served as a stark lesson, and its ripples were felt far and wide. Carter-Reed dynamics, however, did not just move on from the incident. Marcus and Ethan decided to turn the ugly event into a force for positive change. They launched a new major philanthropic initiative through their company's foundation. It was called the Dignity and Service Grant. The program was designed to provide financial support, educational scholarships, and professional development resources for underprivileged drivers, service workers, and hospitality staff, the very people who are often treated as invisible by the powerful worlds they serve. It was a direct and meaningful homage to the lesson learned that day. At the press conference announcing the initiative, it was not Ethan who took the stage, but Marcus. In a rare public appearance, he stood before the cameras not in a driver's jacket, but in one of his simple, elegant suits. He spoke with a quiet authority that captivated the room. He didn't mention Vanessa by name. He didn't need to. He simply spoke about the fundamental importance of respect. A person's value is not determined by their job title or their net worth, Marcus said, his voice calm and steady. It is determined by their character. At Carter-Reed Dynamics, we believe that the person who cleans our floors deserves the same level of respect as the person who sits in our boardroom. This initiative is our commitment to that principle. Lila Torres stood by his side. Her promotion to executive assistant was just the beginning. Marcus saw her sharp mind, her integrity, and her deep sense of empathy. He made her the head of the new foundation, giving her the resources and autonomy to make a real difference. She, who had once been an anonymous part of the service staff, was now in a position to empower thousands just like her. It was a new beginning she had never dreamed possible. Ethan also underwent a transformation. The experience had left him wiser, more cautious, but also more deeply committed to the values he and Marcus shared. He began speaking publicly, not just about technology and business, but about humility and the responsibility that comes with wealth and power. He became a more thoughtful leader, more attuned to the people around him, less susceptible to the charms of a polished facade. His friendship with Marcus, already strong, was now unbreakable, forged in the fire of a shared crisis. As for Marcus Reed, the ordeal did not change him. He returned to his work, to the quiet satisfaction of building and creating. He was still the brain behind the empire, the silent partner who preferred the shadows to the spotlight. He still drove his Toyota Camry to the office some days, not to prove a point, but simply because he liked it. He would park it in the executive garage right next to Ethan's sleek, expensive sports car, and the two vehicles standing side by side became a quiet symbol of their partnership. One the public face, the other the humble engine. Both essential, both equally valuable. For Marcus, power was never about status or recognition. It was not about dominating others or proving his worth. It was about having the freedom to live by his values. It was about building things that lasted. And it was about having the quiet strength to protect what he had built and the people he loved from those who would seek to corrupt it. He had faced the ultimate test of his character and had emerged not with a sense of triumph, but with a renewed sense of purpose. The world was full of Vanessas, people blinded by greed and status. But as long as there were people like Marcus and people with the quiet courage of Lila, there was always hope. The empire was safe, not because of its wealth, but because of its soul. Never mock someone based on what you think they are, because one day the person you disrespect might be the very one who decides your future. Power isn't loud, it's quiet, it's patient, and it remembers. If this story about dignity and justice moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one. What would you have done in this situation? Let us know below.